With us now for more, Dr. Daria Long-Gillespie, an emergency physician at Emory University Hospital and Executive Vice President of ShareCare. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Do you expect that the silver lining from all this could be new, I don't know if cure is the right word, but treatments, vaccines to address this problem with Ebola?
Well, it's possible, and that's something that we're seeing, is that funding is coming from the government and the Department of Defense because Ebola is being seen as a potentially national threat.
So, I mean, it comes down to dollars, as we know, and, companies are reluctant to invest in a product that they don't think they'll make a lot of money on. And they consider a blockbuster drug to be that which can make $1 billion. Could you see an Ebola virus vaccine being a blockbuster drug?
No, an Ebola vaccine is not going to be a commercially successful vaccine. It would be done for the reason that we discussed earlier, because the government sees it as a national threat. But if you look at why companies choose drugs to manufacture, they look at three big factors. One is there a demand? And number two is there a high price that they can command even if there's a low demand? And lastly, what is the regulatory environment? Will there be some FDA fast track, or on the other hand, will it be a very long, onerous clinical trials policy?
This is all of a piece, though, Doctor, isn't it? Because if there is some national threat, that would imply significant exposure among the U.S. population that would perhaps require some sort of treatment. So what would it take for Ebola to become a national threat? What does that mean? What is the threshold?
There's not a number per se. When drug companies look at them, for instance, there are companies like Genzyme have treatments for conditions that only 2,000 people suffer from. So they view that, however, as having a very high price that they can command. So it's not necessarily a number if the number can be countered by a high price. On the other hand, Ebola, you have to look at it as what is the risk to United States and our people here. Right now, it's not necessarily presenting an outbreak situation. So would the government want to pay to treat people in Africa? And the problem is there, you have still a fairly low number of people, only a low number of people who are suffering from the Ebola virus and a low ability to pay. So the funding will have to come from some sort of government entity or non-governmental foundation.
Before we let you go, since you're there at Emory, could you give us a sense of the working environment now, how it has changed since the two patients arrived? And, there's understandably perhaps some apprehension about them now being brought to American soil. Put that in perspective for us as well, if you would.
Well, sure. I went to work in the ER last Friday, which was just after we'd found out they'd be bringing in the patients. And there was definitely some trepidation and questions that I had. And I asked our leaders in our institution, what are our procedures if somebody were to get exposed in addition to this patient? And I was really comforted to know that they have extensive procedures in place to protect not only the staff, but the patients there, their families, and the greater city of Atlanta and United States overall. So really what people feel, I'm really proud of the staff that we have at Emory and the amazing work they're doing right now.
And Doctor, last question for those of us who aren't involved. What do we need to know about Ebola as it is today, the potential for it to spread? I understand it can only be spread through liquids, is that right? Is there any prospect that this would become a disease that's more easily transmitted?
Right now it is only through body fluids. So what I even tell my patients is unless you have been in physical contact with a patient that had Ebola or lived in the home with somebody who had Ebola, you are not at risk for being exposed to Ebola right now. If you did have one of those things, then it's a different situation. But even so, Ebola is still a very rare thing and not in the U.S.
All right, Dr. Daria Long-Gillespie, we appreciate your perspective this afternoon. Emergency physician at Emory University Hospital.